Fayette Commonwealth's Attorney Ray Larson. Ray, of course, I guess the big white elephant in the room is Ferguson. That's what everybody's been talking about over the past few days as the verdict, or well, I guess lack of indictment is in, and the police officer is not going to be indicted.
Was not indicted.
Was not indicted in the shooting of Michael Brown. What say you about this whole process? You know, specifically about the people who think that there's injustice because there's not an indictment. The only way that there was possibly going to be quote-unquote justice is if this police officer was indicted.
Well, it shows a fundamental ignorance of the grand jury system by these people who are, and it's not just the people on the street that are thugs and hoodlums, or people who are family members of like this Michael Brown and that sort of thing. I got something out of the Louisville newspaper from a University of Louisville law professor named Cedric Merlin Powell. This is a law professor, which means he's graduated from some law school somewhere, probably has never been to court, probably knows less than the interns that we have in our office.
Who know a lot, by the way.
Huh?
Who know a lot. You have very intelligent interns, but I get your point.
Yeah. So here's what he says. The grand jury's decision in Ferguson, Missouri is yet another instance of injustice by the criminal justice system to people of color, says U of L law professor Cedric Merlin Powell. Now, then this article went on to explain grand juries have to find probable cause. That is, they have to find that a crime occurred and that this person probably committed it. And only if they find that probable cause do they vote to return an indictment. And this guy says a trial would give the community assurance that justice is the same for everyone in the community, regardless of race. You see, he says it has to be a trial. Now, there is no trial unless there's probable cause to believe a guy committed a crime. This grand jury listened to 70 witnesses and 60 witnesses and 70 hours of testimony over 25 days. And they concluded that there wasn't sufficient evidence to charge this police officer, whatever his name is. And to think that you're just going to ignore the process, it just, and this guy's a lawyer. Now, let me tell you how grand juries work. We select a new grand jury every month in Fayette County, and there are probably 250 or 300 citizens of Fayette County who come in that are going to be jurors for that month. And each one has a number, and all of the numbers go in a box, and it's shaken by the court administrator, and she pulls out 12 numbers, and those people come up to the front and they become the grand jury. We have no idea who they'll be. We've had people on the grand jury that have relatives that have been convicted felons, all of those kind of things. Any race, they have to be 18 or older, they have to be a resident of Fayette County, they have to be able to read and understand the English language. That's all. And they can't be a convicted felon. Now, and that's what we get. The police come in and testify about cases. And then the prosecutors leave the room, and the grand jury decides whether or not the elements of a specific crime have been met. If not, a case is dismissed. If the elements have been met, then an indictment is returned. That's the way the system works. It's random, and these are citizens making decisions. So you looking smirking over there.
no,
You got some smart comment coming
smart
up.
comment. I think the whole purpose of the grand jury, at least from my view, is to keep politics out of stuff. And it's also to keep prosecutors in check. It's to keep judges. It's to keep the whole system in check because it involves the citizens, and it's a common sense. It's a mixture of the common sense, the spirit of the law, the letter of the law. Everything just comes to be in place there. It's a protection for all of us. The grand jury is truly a protection for all of us because our peers have to look at the case to make sure there's something there in the first place before the government puts us through a trial just based on whatever the political wins may be, and that's exactly what the situation is here. And those that are calling, especially those in the legal system, that are saying that the grand jury system should be somehow circumvented for this just because
Just
it's
to give him a trial.
not politically expedient, they're missing the whole point of how all this works. Now, I will say that in the Trayvon Martin case, there's a classic example of our system out of control. Regardless of how you feel about that case, it's just the very fact that the very special prosecutor in that case chose to not even take it to the grand jury and take it to trial. And he was found not guilty because there wasn't enough probable cause to convict the guy. So that just actually...
The evidence in Trayvon Martin was that Zimmerman, is that the guy's name?
Yeah.
That Zimmerman had the right to use self-defense. Mm-hmm. And that was what happened. And the guy...
Well, but the point is, in that particular case, this special prosecutor didn't take it to the grand jury, which is a farce. It's wrong. In that particular case, there's no reason for that. And there you go. When does a prosecutor not, and let's just touch on that briefly, in what situation would a prosecutor not take a case to the grand jury?
If a warrant is taken out for somebody alleged to commit a crime, mm-hmm. and they go through a preliminary hearing in Fayette District Court, and the issue is probable cause, and the judge has to determine whether or not a crime occurred, and is it likely that the guy that's charged did it. And if the judge finds that probable cause, he refers the case to the grand jury. Almost all of the cases that we get go through that process before they're presented to the grand jury. Now, I'll tell you, Officer Don, I keep up with all of this stuff, and about 15% of the cases that we get that are presented to the grand jury are dismissed. Most of those are what they call private complaints that have already been reported to the police, and the police don't believe there's sufficient probable cause to go forward with it. And so it gets to the grand jury, and the grand jury will listen to the evidence and say the elements have not been met. Let me tell you, I do a questionnaire at the end of every grand jury because I want to know, are we doing the job the way we should do it? And I'll tell you why this happened. Back in, many years ago, there was a murder case that was indicted in 57 seconds in Jefferson County. Now that sounds awful, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, well let me tell you something. Let me give you a scenario. You're the police officer and I'm the prosecutor, and I'll say, were you called to a homicide that occurred on Elm Street? And your answer is yes. Tell the grand jury what the evidence was. He said, and you would say, I went to the scene on Elm Street and there was a man standing over a body with a gun in his hand. I looked at him and he said, I did it. I killed him. Okay, no more questions. Now, that probably took 30 seconds. And that's, so it can happen, but I thought it sounded so bad that I created a questionnaire. about those kind of questions. For example, how well do you feel the grand jury was encouraged by the prosecutor to reach its own conclusion in individual cases? And over the almost 20 years we've been doing this survey, we got out of a 4-point grade scale, we're getting about 3.78, which is Phi Beta Kappa in the grading system. This is from the last month. Here's what one grand jury says. I was pleasantly surprised by the level of professionalism and fairness. After another depressing election cycle, it's reassuring to find something about government that works. My congratulations to your prosecutors. Now that's the kind of thing that you want to hear. Now, this guy obviously came in here with the idea that nothing works in the criminal justice system, right? And now all of a sudden he leaves with this kind of a feeling about a grand jury system. So to the leadership in the White House being a divider.
Well, it really, it's like this. The autopsy report in this case was there within a week. And I've heard some police officers say that the United States government sent ambassadors to the funeral of a cop killer, this person who was trying to kill a police officer. How many ambassadors have been sent to the funeral of police officers over the past year? And that's a valid point, because you have to see that. But when that happens, when that occurs, then it makes people believe a wrong has occurred, even when it hasn't. And
it's a perception.
One of the reasons we have the riots, because I think if it was made clear that this is a fair process and it will be what it's going to be, then people wouldn't have the expectation of an indictment.
Bob McCullough, the guy in St. Louis County, prosecutor out there, just went off on social media in the 24-hour news cycle. The problem here is there was a perception that this was a racial thing, and a guy was shot with his hands up. That turned out not to be the case, but that's what people think. No matter what the facts are, that's what people think, and that's as a result of an overzealous media not waiting for the facts, but listening to the dumbass Al Sharptons of the world.
Or ignoring facts.
Yeah.
It's not just waiting for the facts. A lot of the facts were there, but those facts are, look, when you present the fact once and then you move on, you know that the concept of a one-day story versus a three-day story. We deal with that in our business all the time. It's, if it's a one-day story, then you just say, okay, it'll go away. But when they want something a three-day story, then it's gonna stick. And that's, in this particular case, that's what happened here. It's just they wanted to make something out of it that it's not, right?
Yeah.
And it looks like the process actually worked, and people should be grateful for that.
Well, the process worked in Trayvon Martin.
Well, it did, except it was circumvented a little bit. I mean, it was the Trayvon Martin case just proved that should have gone to the grand jury in the first place. Because that's just proof of why it needs to be that way. That system's there for a reason, and it's a protection for all of us. If anyone's ever accused of a crime, you want to make sure that they have due process, and that's part of that process. So, and there it is. We'll see you next week on End Times.